أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي لا يبلغ مدحته القائلون ولا يحصي نعماه العادون ولا يؤدي حقه المجتهدون الذي لا يدرك بعد الهمم ولا يناله غوص الفتن الذي ليس لصفته حد محدود ولا نعت موجود ولا وقت معدود ولا أجل ممدود فترى الخلائق بقدرته ونشر الرياح برحمته ووتد بالصخور ميدان أرضه والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين واللعن الله على أعدائهم أجمعين. قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وفرقان الحميد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وقل جاء الحق وزهق الباطل إن الباطل كان زهوقا آمنا بالله وصدق الله العلي العظيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Banu Israel, ayah number 81 tells us, and say, the truth has come and falsehood has vanished. Surely falsehood is a vanishing thing. Coming to almost an end of the season of Azadari of Sayyidul Shuhada Abu Abdullah al-Hussein salawatullahi wa salamu alayh, it is also important that we remind ourselves of the sacrifices and the personality of the second in command, the full partner of the mission of Hussein, and that is none other than Zainab Ulya Maqam binti Ali salawatullahi wa salamu alayhim. So let us briefly remind ourselves of certain qualities and certain traits of Janab Zainab alayha salam, who was a unique personality of her own. Janab Zainab is unmatched by any other and is second only to Janab Fatimatu Zahra salawatullahi wasalamu alayha. She was the first female child of Amir al-Mu'mineen and Janab Fatima, and some earlier ulama also tell us that because she had a daughter by the name of Kulthum, Kulthum is a title to her rather than a second daughter of Amir al-Mu'mineen. However, both sides have said this, that there is two daughters, one have said one. These historical facts are things that we cannot verify at this stage, and we will accept what is normally said. She grew up under all the five of the Ahlul Kisa. She was one who bid all of them farewell, one after the other. She was one who was second in rank only to her mother. She completed the mission of Abu Abdullah with her jihad on the streets of Kufa and the palace of Yazid in Sham. The depth of her khutbahs was such that it was a sword of Amir al-Mu'mineen, and which destroyed the arrogance and the powers to be with her khutbahs on those two occasions. Her marifat was such that amongst her titles, one was given by a Ma'asum Imam, the fourth Imam, who called her Al-Muallima Al-Alima Ghaira Muallima, the knowledgeable one who did not have any tutors. Her tutors were those who were ma'asumeen only, her father and her two brothers with whom she lived. Her faith was such that nothing could shake her. And she was like a flag bearer of her mother. Though Janab Fatimatu Zahra salamullahi alayha did not get longer life, she was martyred in the age of 18 only. and she brought about a revolution amongst the women of those times by giving them the value of women in Islam. And she was the one who taught the women of what their worth and value is. However, she did not get time, or she was not given time due to her martyrdom, and thereafter Janab Zainab alayha salam held her flag and moved forward. Her faith was such that nothing could shake her. She refused to submit or be subjugated by the world of arrogance. Whatever she went through, she stood firm on her faith, and she comprehended the tenets of deen the way Amir al-Mu'mineen had explained and had taught her. And she elevated the status of women, that nothing can stop women from progressing and standing firm on their faith. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Her gratitude and thankfulness, besides all her life, can be seen on the night of Sham-e-Ghariba, that she witnessed herself the entire day of atrocities that were meted out on the Ahl-Haram of that day, yet she on the night of Sham-e-Ghariba thanks Allah, recites Salatul Layl, and she was the one who went amongst the bodies after that, after the Maghrib, and went there and picked up, or rather put her hands under the body of Abu Abdullah and thanked Allah and said, Rabbana taqabbal hadhal qurban. Ya Allah, accept this sacrifice from us. She was a brave and courageous lady and stood all forms of misfortunes that were brought in front of her. She was only 5 when she saw her grandfather's martyrdom, after which she witnessed in that young and tender age how the Muslims, even before the burial of Rasulullah, turned against the Ahlul-bayt. Those who flocked the houses of Rasulullah were the same people who came again to the house of Rasulullah, but this time they came with fire. This time they came to traumatize the children of Amir al-Mu'mineen. They came and broke the door of Fatimatu Zahra, and they tied a rope around Amir al-Mu'mineen and dragged him to the masjid. This is the trauma she saw at a young age of only 5, and this is how she grew. She witnessed the injustice that was meted out upon the people of the house of Rasulullah. She also witnessed how Amir al-Mu'mineen was brought in front and fought for, and was actually fought against in the battles of Jamal and Siffin and Nahrawan, which finally led to the martyrdom of Amir al-Mu'mineen in the masjid of Kufa. She also witnessed how the companions and the commanders of Aba Muhammad al-Hasan ibn Ali alayhi salam were also those who fled from the principles of Aba Muhammad and the principles of Rasulullah and left him alone. And then comes the day of Ashura, which history had never seen before, nor will future ever be able to see that day. A day when the entire household was wiped out. Mu'mineen, we need to understand the effect of that day. When one person dies in our family of natural causes, the first thing the family members get to worry about are the children of that family, that they should not be traumatized. They should be explained this is a natural process. One has to die. We take them to Qabristan even when they are young so that they may get some solace out of it. However, Zainab had to look after the children of that day, when whoever went in the morning never came back, to the extent that even Abu Abdullah himself went and could not come back. However, despite all these adversities and all the oppression, She stood like a solid rock. When Ibn Ziyad tried to taunt her by saying, "How did you find Allah who killed your brother and all that in your family?" she only says that we are happy that we are of that family that have been purified by Allah. And when Ibn Ziyad says, "How did you find Allah that He did what He did to you?" she says, "I only found beauty in Allah." That was her steadfastness and faith in Allah. She stood courageously and she knocked out the power of might and stood up in such a way that she showed the world that even without the sword of Zulfikar, she could stand and show the power of right over might. She did not succumb to any pressure or injustice. She braved it very much. Her courage was such that when she entered Kufa was a city when she had gone there as a princess during the time of Amir al-Mu'mineen, when Amir al-Mu'mineen shifted his capital from Medina to Kufa after the Battle of Jamal. She also moved and migrated to Kufa with her family, Abdullah ibn Jafar and her children. They were in Kufa. In Kufa also she held classes. She taught Quran, she taught tafsir, she taught ahadith, and there were scores and scores of women who used to come to learn under her tutelage. She was one who used to hold classes in Masjid of Kufa after Salat of Zohar. And there were women who got her to know her and learned from her. And she was such that even the people of Kufa gave her a title of Aqilatul Bani Hashim, the intellectual of Banu Hashim. That is how she was. She was one who explained the verses of Quran with clarity and with depth such that they could understand everything that Janab Zainab was telling them. Allahumma salli. So when she entered Kufa as a captive this time, and Ibn Ziyad tried to belittle the household of Rasulullah, and she gave a khutbah on the streets of Kufa. The cronies of Ibn Ziyad tried to make noise and tried to agitate the animals which were there on the streets so that people would not have to listen to the eloquence and the khutbah of Janab Zainab. But Janab Zainab, with just one sign, an ishara of her hand, made the entire crowd to come to a standstill with pin-drop silence, including the animals who did not make any sound until she finished speaking. Such was her khutbah in Kufa that Ibn Ziyad had to write a letter to Yazid and say, "I cannot hold these captives anymore because soon Zainab is going to overturn the entire public against me and my throne will be overturned. So I am sending them to you and you take care of them." When she went to Sham, and the events we have heard that happened in Sham, but when there came an opportunity, she gave a khutbah in the palace of Sham, the superpower of that time, one who had all the military might, one who had the media in their hands, one who had every aspect of worldly might under his disposal. But when Zainab stood up in ropes and chains and addressed Yazid, she said she did not buckle up, though there were 700 dignitaries who were seated in that palace at that time, because the captives were presented as those Kharijis who had rose up against the Khalifa, whom the Khalifa had already captured. When she stood up, and when she addressed Yazid, after a few lines of the Quran and explaining who she was and which family she belonged to, she turned to Yazid and said two words that gave a background of who Yazid was and who Zainab was. She just said, "Yabnat Tulaqa," or the son of a freed slave. Two words. but it gave a background of the entire situation of who was standing in front of whom. By saying this, she reminded the entire public that she comes from that family whose grandfather freed the grandfather of Yazid after the conquest of Makkah. She reminded people that look at this is that person whose grandfather was a slave, a captured slave of Makkah by my grandfather, and upon whom my grandfather had mercy and released them as a slave and made them free again. She was one who gave khutbahs very eloquently, like Amir al-Mu'mineen, in few words, but she could explain the most out of it. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. When we look at Janab Zainab, she was the second Zahra. Like her mother, she also suffered beyond comprehension. And we look at the mission of Aba Abdullah. Aba Abdullah al-Hussein salawatullahi wa salamu alayk had to confront two major situations in the Ummah at that time. There was one half of the population which was the Shamis, as we call. Sham at that time was the greater Sham, which included what we know today as Jordan, Syria, Palestine, and also parts of Egypt. And on the other hand, there was the other faction, which was the rest of the Muslim world, which included Iraq, Egypt, and all others that were Saudi Arabia and all that we know today. However, the situation in both these geographical locations were different. The Shamis were under misconceptions and the Shamis were under misinformation of the media of Muawiyah. And they did not know the worth and the value and what Ahlul-bayt alayhimus salam stood for. Whilst on the other hand, the people of the rest other than Sham, those who were in Iraq and Saudi Arabia and those neighboring lands, even including Iran for that matter, which was partially Muslim at that time, they became negligent. There were those who became indifferent, whatever was happening. Why am I concerned? Why should I be bothered? Whatever is happening, let it happen. Allah will take care of it. So Imam had two diverse issues to be able to confront, but these two diverse issues could not be done with a single blow. And therefore he had a two-pronged mission. One was to bring about a shock and awe in those who had become indifferent with the teachings of Rasulullah. On the other hand, there was the mission of educating the masses against the media propaganda that was there in Sham. However, how would he do that? He needed two lieutenants. And that is where we see the value of the two lieutenants of Abu Abdullah, which were none other, and none else could take their place except Abul Fadl al-Abbas and Zainab al-Ulya Maqam alayhi salatu wassalam. To combat ignorance and jahalat in the greater Sham area, he needed a mission that needed a head of the mission, and that was his sister Janab Zainab. On the other hand, to combat negligence and ghaflat of the ummah, he had to give them the shahadat of his loved ones as well as himself. So, what was that is that for ghaflat and negligence and indifference, the solution would be to give shahadat of his children, his companions, and himself. But the greater jihad was to come after, which was to educate and tell the public, the misinformed and the ignorant Muslims, of the reality of deen, the reality, educate them about the Ahlul-bayt. And that mission was undertaken by Janabe Zainab. Zainab was the only capable personality to have taken that role. And she was, whilst under the imamat of the time, which was Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam, yet she was also undertaking to look after the children and the women who had suffered in Karbala thereafter. Karbala is the supreme sacrifice. It is a total revolution. It awakens the dead heart. Karbala is something that Imam Hussein did not only do it for the sake of it, but it was a well-planned thing in the sense that it brought a revolution of minds and hearts. That until today, 14 centuries later, Karbala is still one that revives the dead hearts. When it came to the Shahadat of Abu Abdullah and the companions, it stirred the souls of Muslims. And many movements thereafter, after the day of Ashura, many movements began. The Tawabin and the rest that grew up, so that they felt sorry that they had gone into that state. But in the process, it became something that became a revolution, a continuous revolution until today. On the other hand, Sharikatul Hussein, the name which is given to Janabe Zainab, the full partner of Hussein's mission, was one who stirred the feelings and the people of Medina and taught them who the Ahlul-bayt was. Such was her station and such was her part of the revolution that in the house of the enemy she raised the flag of Ya Hussein. The first majalis happened upon the release of Janabe Zainab and the women and the children in Sham. That she asked and demanded that they be given a house where they could mourn about Abdullah, in which she was the one who was the speaker. And she told the ladies what happened on the day of Ashura, why it happened, where it started, what happened thereafter, and how she became a prisoner when she was the daughter of Ali and Fatima. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Zainab's sacrifice was such that it was the Zulfikar of Ali. Her sacrifice was such that it was the peace treaty of Hassan. Her sacrifice was such that it was equal to the blood that was shed on the day of Ashura by Abu Abdullah. When we speak about Janabe Zainab, we can only imagine what she must have gone through. We cannot even account and recount the atrocities that she had to face. Zainab, when she was released from the captivity of Yazid in Sham, now leaves Janabe Sakina in the prison whom she had buried with Imam Sajjad. And the caravan now leaves, and Janabe Zainab requests that we want to go to Medina, back home. However, we want to go through Karbala. So they go to Karbala first after Sham, and there is azadari that takes place for 3 days. Thereafter she leaves Karbala and the caravan leaves for Medina. And when they see the outskirts of Medina and when she sees the walls of Medina, she exclaims what is in the verses of Quran, Ya Ahla Yathrib la muqama lakum, O people of Medina, there is no place for you to stand here. Abu Abdullah has been killed. O people of Medina, we went from Medina when we had all our sons and brothers and our fathers with us. Now we have returned back without any males. When this happened, when the when they were on the outskirts of Medina, Imam Sajjad told Bashir, who was leading the caravan, that you will stop here, we will pitch our tents here. You go into the city and announce in Medina that the Kafilah of Hussein has come back to Medina. And Hussein was killed on the day of Ashura in Karbala, and the family has returned after having lost all their males. So when he came and started announcing, people started out and started crying and doing Azah, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein. In that moment, Bashir reaches the place where the Banu Hashim used to live. And when he announced that Kutil al-Husainu bi Karbala, Zubihal Husainu bi Karbala, he saw an elderly lady come out of a house with a young boy who was holding her hand and a stick on the other hand. And she came and says, "Oh Sheikh, what are you telling that Hussein was killed in Karbala?" He says, "Yes, Allah, Amma, Hussein was killed thirsty. Hussein was killed without any mercy." And he says, "Then where was my Abbas that was there with him?" He says, "Oh Amma, Hussein was alone when he was killed. Abbas's arms were cut off and he was killed before Hussein." But Ummul Baneen raises her hands and tells Allah, "Ya Allah, Alhamdulillah, but I will not weep for Abbas or his brothers. I will weep for Hussein for the rest of my life." Finally, when people started coming out, they came to the Imam and Janabe Zainab. The women sat in the tent with Janabe Zainab and the men were sitting outside with the Imam, and both were giving the account of what happened to the caravan that left, which left in such glory, has now returned without all the males, including the grandson of Rasulullah. After a few moments, when everything subsided, then Imam says, "We will now proceed to go into Medina and we will go to the Haram of Rasulullah." The caravan of Janabe Zainab and Imam Sajjad was going with entire Medina. Mu'minin, this was Medina that they entered, not Sham. There were no swords, there was no one who slept the children, there was no stones that were being thrown to them, and they went straight to the Haram of Rasulullah, by the grave of Rasulullah. When Zainab went to the grave of Rasulullah, she began to lament and says, "Ya Rasulullah, subbat alal masaib law annaha subbat alal ayyami sirna layaliya." The mercy of our mother or our grandfather. So much grief was beaten upon us that should it have been beaten upon the day, it would have turned into the night. Ya Rasulullah, your Hussein was killed. Ya Rasulullah, they did not even give him a drop of water. Ya Rasulullah, they killed all our men and all our children. Ya Rasulullah, Hussein was tortured before he was killed. Ya Rasulullah. Ya Rasulullah, they put the head of your son, whom you kissed so much, on the head of the spear. They burnt our tents and looted our belongings, and they took us and paraded us as captives from village to village, city to city. Ya Rasulullah, we have come back here, but we have overthrown the king's palace. Ya Rasulullah, we have come back and I have brought you the shirt of Hussein. After which Zainab turns towards to face the grave of her mother. Mu'mineen, when a daughter is in grief, she goes to her mother. I don't know how to say what Zainab may have lamented to Fatima. Oh Fatima, your Hussein. على لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. ماتم حسين.